After the fatal chokehold of Eric Garner by a New York City police officer, a familiar pattern unfolded: expressions of outrage, promises to investigate, a long wait for a resolution. On Tuesday, just before the 5th anniversary of Mr. Garner's death, word came that federal prosecutors would not seek civil rights charges against Daniel Pontalio, the officer who put Mr. Garner in a chokehold. Mr. Garner's death was among several involving the police in recent years that have led to protests and calls for the officer to face criminal charges. Here is what has happened to the officers in some of the other cases. Protesters marched for months in 2014 when Darren Wilson, a white Ferguson MO police officer, shot and killed Michael Brown, an unarmed black teenager. Mr. Wilson resigned. County grand jurors declined to indict him, and federal prosecutors decided not to file civil rights charges. In 2014, Timothy Loman, a rookie patrolman in Cleveland, shot and killed Tamir Rice, a black 12-year-old, within seconds of arriving outside a recreation center where Tamir was carrying a replica gun. Mr. Loman, who is white, was not criminally charged, but was fired from the Cleveland police for lying about a past job on his employment application. Years later, Mr. Loman accepted another policing job in rural Ohio, but resigned under pressure from activists. He has appealed his firing from the Cleveland police force. Protesters in Minneapolis occupied the area outside a police precinct for days in 2015 after Jamar Clark, a black man, was shot during a struggle with officers Mark Ringenberg and Dustin Schwartz. Both officers, who are white, returned to work after the county prosecutor and the police chief cleared them of wrongdoing. In 2017, Officer Ringenberg was among the first officers on the scene after another Minneapolis officer shot and killed an unarmed woman. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, prosecutors swiftly charged Officer Betty Jo Shelby with manslaughter after she shot and killed Terrence Crutcher, an unarmed black man, in 2016. But jurors acquitted her, and Officer Shelby, who is white, returned to work. She later resigned from the Tulsa police after being assigned a desk job, and joined a sheriff's department in a nearby county. Twice, prosecutors tried to convince jurors that Ray Tensing, a white University of Cincinnati police officer, was guilty of murder in the death of Samuel DuBose, an unarmed black driver. Twice, jurors deadlocked and failed to reach a verdict. Prosecutors declined to seek a third trial. Mr. Tensing, who had been fired shortly after the shooting, was later reported to have reached a settlement with the university that included legal fees and nearly $250,000 in back pay. Baltimore erupted in large, sometimes violent, protests in 2015 when Freddie Gray, a black man, died after suffering a spinal cord injury while in police custody. The local prosecutor charged 6 officers in connection with his death, but none were convicted. Federal prosecutors declined to file charges. Roy D. Oliver II, a white police officer in Balch Springs, Texas, shot and killed Jordan Edwards with a high-powered rifle as Jordan, who was black and 15, and other teenagers drove away from a house party in 2017. Mr. Oliver was convicted of murder last summer and sentenced to 15 years in prison, a sentence Jordan's family called too lenient. Mohammed Noor, a Minneapolis police officer, said he feared for his life when Justine Rushdick, a white woman wearing pajamas and holding a glittery cell phone, approached his squad car on a summer night in 2017. Mr. Noor, who is black, shot and killed her. Jurors did not accept his account, and convicted him of murder this year. He was sentenced to 12.5 years in prison. A 2014 video showing Jason Van Dyke, a white Chicago police officer, firing 16 shots into Laquan McDonald, a black teenager who had been holding a knife, touched off political upheaval and led to an agreement to overhaul the city's police department. Jurors found Mr. Van Dyke guilty of murder last year, the first such conviction for an on-duty Chicago officer in decades, and he was sentenced in January to nearly 7 years in prison. Laquan's family and the Illinois Attorney General called the sentence inadequate.